Hi, Wally Taylor from Texas Integrative Medicine in Austin, Texas. And I'd like to say a few words about the role of stress in chronic complex illness. Chronic complex illness is a group of symptoms associated with exposure to environmental toxins persistent over time. This would include symptoms like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, a whole host of autoimmune conditions, immune dysfunction conditions, weakness, brain conditions, including anxiety and depression. In my practice here in Austin, Texas, seeing patients presenting with these symptoms, it's amazing to me how often when I take a history of the patient and ask them specifically, tell me about when you first really began to notice significant onset of your symptoms, how often it is that people will tell me that my symptoms really became bad when, and then they'll describe some significant life stress event. In some cases, it can be a fight with a friend. It can be the death of a loved one or even a pet. It can be an accident. Sometimes it can be a financial calamity. Sometimes it can be a really major problem with a relationship. But I see this over and over again. And all my medical career for the past 40 years, it's been obvious to me in day-to-day practice that when people are under stressed, they're more likely to get sick, they're more likely to be tired, they're more likely to have psychological symptoms. This is just common knowledge. But now, because of some recent research that's come out in the last several years regarding of the role of the brain and stress, a lot of this is becoming a lot more clear to me and to others. And the exciting thing is we're actually finding that there's ways that we can help people reverse some of these effects that we see from stress. So we know that stress seems to arise from that part of the brain where we have our stress center. Many people call this the limbic system of the brain, but it's a part of the brain that's an old part, sits just above the nose, and it consists of a number of structures, but some of the more important structures in that part of the brain are the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. But it has connections, both nerve connections and hormonal connections, with virtually all of the systems of the body. So it's been shown in lab animals and others that when when animals or people are exposed to significant stress, the body goes into what we call the sympathetic nervous system response. This is the so-called fight, flight, fear, or freeze. Now, this response on the part of our limbic system has been there for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, we know that this fight, flight, fear, freeze response is actually highly protective of animals and humans when they're in a situation of danger or stress. Like, for example, if they were being chased by a wild animal, or if they were close to a fire, or something where they had to really respond rapidly. And it's self-protective. But in the eons past, we know that this sympathetic nervous system response, or fight, flight, or fear, typically only lasted a short period of time. Then the threat would diminish, and the person would go back into a resting state, or the animal would return to a resting state. Sometimes we call this rest, digest, and repair, or some people say that this is the parasympathetic nervous system mediated more by the vagus nerve. But the interesting thing is that as a result of increased exposure to a whole host of ongoing environmental toxins, and when I say toxins, I mean chemical toxins, toxic heavy metals like lead, mercury, and arsenic, certain biological toxins such as mold toxins, or having the presence of a viral toxin or a bacterial toxin in your body, or even now we're learning that certain physical factors can be toxic, such as exposure to high voltage power lines or electromagnetic frequency as smart meters or Wi-Fi's, computers, sometimes even personal cell phones and laptops and iPads. But all of these toxins actually can injure cells of the body, but particularly the part of the brain known as the limbic system is very easily damaged by exposure to these toxins. And when this happens, it can even induce a state of what we call limbic encephalitis. We're actually able to show changes in the size and shape of portions of the limbic system through studies like the NeuroQuant MRI, which actually takes the MRI radiographic technology and measures each and every part of the limbic system to show areas that are swollen or even atrophied. So this is a very real phenomenon. But when a person or an animal gets stuck in fight, flight, or fear, which is also called sympathetic hyperreactivity or sympathetic hypersensitivity, real things happen in the body because of the way the limbic system is actually connected via nerves and hormones with all of these other body systems. So it's been known for a long time, and there's some excellent studies in both animals and humans to show that when a person is experiencing stress, fight, flight, or fear, that there are measurable changes in the immune system. The cells of the immune system change. Many of the signaling markers, peptides, and proteins of the immune system change significantly when there's stress and when the stress is maintained. The other thing we know is that the hormones of the body are dramatically affected by this condition of fight, flight, fear, or freeze. Cortisol and the sympathetic hormones epinephrine and adrenaline dramatically affected, but so too are many of the other adrenal stress hormones, the thyroid hormones, even in fact the gonadal hormones, the ovarian and testicular hormones can become affected as well. The digestive tract seems to be significantly affected by this condition of fight, flight, or fear. That's why so many people experience a sensation of butterflies in their stomach when they're scared or when they're afraid or when they're emotional. But we do know that conditions like diarrhea, constipation, bloating, even abdominal pain and reflux can all be related to this situation of chronic fight, flight, or fear. Now, this has been given other names, and it's been described by many people. A lady from Victoria, Canada, by the name of Annie Hopper, who's quite an expert on this condition, terms it limbic system impairment. And she's actually one of the front runners in terms of some therapeutic modalities that we will talk about in an upcoming video. So the one thing I want to finish off by absolutely stressing is that what I'm saying here is that when the body is chronically and persistently exposed to certain toxins, usually in combination, it will affect the whole body, but particularly the limbic brain is very sensitive. And when the limbic brain becomes inflamed and affected in this way, it triggers this sympathetic hypersensitivity or overstimulation, which some people call fight, flight, fear, freeze. And when this happens, there are significant measurable changes that occur to the body that are very real. So this is not a psychological phenomenon. This is not a phenomenon that the animal or individual has any actual control over. It's merely a response, a pathologic response to physiological stimuli. The most exciting thing for me is that we've learned that with this sympathetic hypersensitivity or overstimulation, a couple of other things are shown to be reacting that are very significant in terms of explaining much of the body's pathology in this situation. One, we know now that our body's mitochondria, the little guys in most all of our cells that generate about 95% of the energy that we need for our body to function in the form of the chemical ATP, which is our stored chemical energy molecule, that when we're in fight or flight, the body seems to have a mechanism where it can actually dial down or turn down the mitochondria's ability to generate ATP. Now, Dr. Robert Navio, who's a very brilliant mitochondrial researcher from San Diego, California, the University of California, San Diego, where he has perhaps the most advanced mitochondrial lab in the world, has described this phenomenon very eloquently in several papers, and he terms it the mitochondrial cell danger response. It has been a game changer for me in my practice, and I would highly recommend that if you're interested that you look into that further. There's some very good papers about that online. The other thing that I think is amazing is the fact that when the body is in fight or flight, one of the things that seems to be able to be triggered is this phenomenon through the immune system of what we call mast cell activation, MASTCELL. The mast cells are one of the cells of our immune system, one of the 200 odd different cells in the immune system. These cells are fixed. They don't really circulate in the body. They're fixed in tissues like the brain or the GI tract or the heart or the lungs or the skin. But the mast cells are full of these toxic mediators, one of the main ones being the molecule histamine, which is very useful to the body to fight certain infections and foreign invaders. But at the same time, histamine is very toxic to our cells and tissues. So the body has many mechanisms to try to inactivate histamine just as soon as it's released for the purposes of the immune system. But it turns out that when the body is in this condition of fight, flight, fear, sympathetic, limbic system hypersensitivity or overactivity, that these mast cells become very erratic or very destabilized. Some have called this mast cell activation syndrome or mast cell activation disorder. But suffice it to say, when the mast cells are in this condition, they will release these various toxic inflammatory mediators, oftentimes very inappropriately. I've even seen people have dramatic histamine releases when they drink water, like, for example, water that's too cold, which is really almost unimaginable, but we see it. We also find that these patients tend to become sensitive to any number of different things in the food and in the air. These people cannot tolerate oftentimes any kinds of chemical scents. They develop what we call multiple chemical sensitivity. They develop multiple allergies and intolerances to many different foods and liquids, even vitamins, supplements, medicines. They become what I call universal reactors. But the exciting thing is that much of this is mediated by this limbic system, and it's almost all reversible. What I mean to say by that is if we can help the limbic system come out of this oversensitivity, many of these other sensitivities and many of the other physiologic phenomena that we see occurring throughout the body are able to virtually completely reverse. So that's the exciting thing for people to understand, is the very important role that stress plays in our chronic illness. Chronic illness, which is usually triggered by exposure to a whole host of environmental toxins, which unfortunately are becoming extremely common in our environment, and the secondary effects. And the exciting thing is that, again, with proper attention, avoidance of toxins, and treatment, these conditions can virtually completely reverse. It's not psychological. It's not all in your head. There's nothing you can really do to prevent it, although there are strategies that you can learn that can help it reverse. So I hope this has been helpful. It's truly been a real game changer in my practice of environmental illness here at Texas Integrative in Austin, Texas. And if you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm going to be giving some further explanations about the limbic system, hyper response. Also, please feel free to share this on your social media or with friends and family. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope you have a blessed day.